mai onde estava hoje?
My name is Steve Parks. I'm a professor at Syracuse University. And I come from a long line of steelworkers. My whole family grows out of the steel industry in Pittsburgh. And for most of my life, I thought I was going to end up in the steel industry too. But then the 80s hit and the economic tsunami just washed the jobs in the steel industry away, leaving behind communities really who didn't know what the future was for the next generation, what they were going to do. There was no longer going to be steel. What would happen? At that moment, I often think my community could have quit. They could have decided there was no future for the kids and just sort of let them trail off and sort of disperse the community. What I've always admired is at that moment the community came together. They sort of took on extra jobs so kids could go to school. They loaned cars so we could drive to school. They borrowed money so we could buy books. They did everything a community could do to launch the next generation into college. But when I got to college, just because you're launched doesn't mean you're going to succeed. And I think when I took first year writing, that's the place where I began to understand what it meant to write in the academy, what the central questions are, what the skills you would need. Because for all the skills I learned from my community, they didn't necessarily translate into what it meant to do an academic paper, what it meant to be in a philosophy class, what it meant to write a scientific report. And so I've always kind of felt this great calling to keep that tradition alive. Because if you think about today's generations of students, they've faced 2 wars, and they faced one of the worst recessions in the sense of depression than any generation. And so I understand that. I understand how a tsunami came along in their lives and washed things away. And I understand how communities now are like struggling to get their own kids through school, how they're borrowing and lending and working. And I think that the skills I learned as in a writing class made me want to be a writing teacher. And I think this is a moment that I understand what students are thinking about, the pressures they face. And it's a moment I think that I understand the real importance of teaching freshman writing and the way that it's a gateway to a larger future and really a great sense of economic security, which is something my parents never had after the tsunami, but I have now as a writing teacher. And I think that tradition of thinking about writing as not just in a classroom, but within a community, that tradition of thinking of students as more than just a set of papers, but thinking about how writing sort of enmeshes within their whole lives and can project them forward, is really what the writing classroom is. And as I think about 4Cs, I think that's the history and legacy and sort of the commitment that drew me to 4Cs. And that's what I see whenever I come to these conferences, is that commitment.